tonight because we live in Canada. I am going to start with what has happened with our own bank. Now, this subject is one of the most important subjects anybody can ever talk about. I'm just going to quote 3 famous people here so that you'll know. Jefferson said, if the American people ever allowed private banks to control the issue of their currency, first by inflation and then by deflation, the banks and the corporations that will grow up around them, and he puts the banks first, look at that, will deprive the people of all property until their children wake up homeless. So that was Jefferson, and that's what's happening now. Roosevelt, the liberty of a democracy is not safe if the people tolerate the growth of private power to a point where it becomes stronger than the democratic state itself. That, in its essence, is fascism. Ownership of government by an individual, by a group, or any controlling private power. So that's what we have now. They're not wearing brown shirts, they're not pounding on your door yet, but that's what it is. Henry Ford even said, if the people of the nation understood our banking and monetary system, I believe there would be a revolution before tomorrow morning. It's the most important subject. It is the only subject that you cannot get so-called activists like Abby Lewis to talk about. It's the only subject. That's how dangerous it is. They know their jobs will be on the line. They can't speak of it. It is what you never discuss. So, we'll start out here with what I call the octopus, okay? And we'll give it all the arms. And see, people that are now coming out against all the trade agreements, they don't even know where these agreements are coming from. Where they're coming from, okay? So, here's one arm, okay? The World Bank. There's another arm. This explains where all these trade agreements come from. You have to know where they come from. They're banking contracts. They have nothing to do with trade. They never did. They are banking agreements. And the BIS, the Bank of International Settlements, now that's the bank that in '91 said that the Bank of Canada didn't have to have any more reserve. The reserve was taken out of the bank in '91, and the BIS was behind that. Then you've got this other agreement you never hear about, the Financial Services Industries Agreement. So while Maud Barlow and everybody was getting excited about the MAI, they passed this one in secret. This is the one that they will use to try and prevent nations from using their own central banks, okay? That's the other arm. Then there's the GATT, tariffs and trade. They all come out of that. Then there's the NAFTA, which means that private corporations can sue governments if we don't accept, like the MMT, we're all breathing that in now. It's banned in California, no one breathes it there, but we do. Because they were going to sue us, so Chrétien came out, after it was banned, he came out and told everyone it was good for them and gave them $13 million in compensation. So that was NAFTA. Then the World Trade Organization, that's the other one, and the World Health Organization. Now, and where do these all come from? Okay, it's going to be an international bankers. Brave New World. Now, these are the guys who write all those contracts, and it's between them and governments. So that's where all the trade agreements come from. Nothing to do with trade. They've never had anything to do with trade. We've been trading for thousands of years without all these trade agreements. Thousands of years the world's been trading. Never needed these agreements. These agreements are banking contracts. That's what they are, absolutely. So now that I've got that up there, we're going to start with Canada. And how it started all this for us. And you'll see where we blended with the Americans at a certain point. It's very interesting. So in 1867, what did we have? We had the British North American Act. And in that act, it gave the Canadian government responsibility to raise capital through the issuance and control of our currency. That act, in the very beginning, gave Canada the right to base interest-free money, issuing new interest-free money based, and I'm going to repeat it here, based upon the resources and wealth of our nation. Not upon somebody might have gold in a safe or this. Based upon, and that's what the British North American Act said in 1867. Now, 45 years after Confederation, the government passed an amendment to the British North American Act, an amendment. And the amendment said, and they passed this amendment without us knowing, with no referendum, nothing. 45 years later, and the amendment said, without a referendum, and the amendment gave the issuance of our money and credit over to the private banks. And when was that? 45 years later? 1913. Okay? So the United States has had an influence on Canada since then, because 1913 in the U.S., the Federal Reserve came in. So 1913 here, the same thing happened to us, but it was much, much quieter. In the States, that people were talking in Congress, people like the aviator's father, Lindbergh, the head of the banking committee, they told all the Americans what was happening, that they'd been scammed, and that had been passed through by only a few of them while they were on Christmas holiday. But in Canada, nothing. This amendment just came in on our Constitution, which said, the issuance of our money, creation of our money, to go to the private banks. 1913, the same year as it did in America.
Just in time for the war.
Yep, just in time for the war. Then, something else happened that helped a little bit. In 1935, the Depression was at its height. And in 1935, Mackenzie King amended the charter of the Bank of Canada. Now, he didn't do anything about this, okay? He amended the charter of the Bank of Canada. Mackenzie King. And he amended it to say that the Bank of Canada could issue 50% of our new money. Not all of it like it had before. He was going to give it 100%, exactly as it was in '67, but he was a good friend of Rockefeller. He adored Rockefeller. And when Rockefeller had a lot of miners worked for him, I forget the name of the mine, but he had them all massacred when they went out on strike. And Mackenzie King went to court and to give character reference to Rockefeller because he just adored him. So 50% back. 50% was returned the Bank of Canada. 50%. And when he took Rockefeller's advice and only gave the bank 50%, he knew, Rockefeller knew, that when you give private bankers any percentage, they end up with it all. And over the years, they have. So he was elected because he said, I'll give the Bank of Canada 100%. We won't be paying interest anymore to private bankers for our infrastructure. Government won't be paying interest anymore. They all believed him, they elected him, and then he knocked it down, he reneged and knocked it down to 50%. That was Mackenzie King. Isn't that the one I used to listen to his dead mother? I'm not sure now. Yes, so that's what happens, see. Anyway, so he promised to give back 100%, but he didn't. Then, in the ensuing years, even though we only had 50% of interest-free money, that's how we got our health care, that's how we paid off the war. We got everything. We did have housing at one point, government housing, all of that. We got it all because we had at least 50% of our new money issued at no interest to us. Whereas the Americans from 1913 in the U.S., they didn't even have 50%. So that's why their debt is huge now. Ours is only $600 billion, 95% interest, compound interest, and theirs is in the trillions. Because for a brief period, I would say right up until maybe 74, when Chrétien became finance minister, in this period here, this is where we really boomed. We had all our social programs. Canada was just, it was an amazing place right up until the 70s. And simply because we were given at least 50% of it. But also, through this time, the private banks were taking more and more of that percentage back to themselves. And now today, in 2003 today, what percentage does the Bank of Canada issue in new money and credit of all our money? 2%. Change in your pocket. And in 91, the Bank of International Settlements, the BIS, were behind this. Our banks made some pretty bad deals in Latin America. They're always speculating. It's like a big casino. They made a lot of mistakes. They lost a lot of money. So what happened? The BIS advised our government to tell them, the private banks, you don't have to leave any collateral with the Bank of Canada now. Before that, the banks, all the private banks, had to leave in the Bank of Canada. They had to deposit, leave a deposit there for collateral to stop them from loaning out too much money. And that was called the reserve in the Bank of Canada. The reserve in the bank, which stopped them, was collateral. When you give a bank collateral yourself, you don't get any interest on it. That's your collateral, or they won't lend you anything. So this reserve in the Bank of Canada was collateral that our government said to the private banks, you have got to leave so much with us. And that stopped them from going sky high with their speculations. So when they made mistakes and the BIS said, okay, you can have that now. You don't have to leave any reserve with the Bank of Canada. Well, you know what that means? It means that the private banks can do what they're doing today. They're lending out 400 times what they actually have. 400 times what they actually have. If you did that, you'd be in jail. So now they don't even need, there's no collateral in there. And they complained, when it was in there, they said, but we're not getting interest on it. Well, why should you get interest on collateral? If you gave collateral to somebody so that they'd lend you money, why would they pay you interest on your collateral? But this is what they told the Bank of Canada. So the collateral's not there anymore. We've got no reserve in the bank. And now the private banks can just lend, just use one amount for a basis, a foundation, and then they just go, that's it. They use that for a little basis, and then they go right out there. 400 times as much as they actually have. So now we're we're down to 2%. So what does that mean? That means our debt, which was back here, was something like 37 billion. In fact, I have the exact figures here, and I'll read them to you. This is just, and this is why, I'm sorry, this is why you're all going to be working, and you're never going to get ahead. This is directly, it's a matter of life and death. So, I'm going to read you now. The original debt is actually 37 billion. Now it's up to 600 billion plus. And this is made crystal clear in the November 93 Auditor General's report, which shows that from 1867 until 1992, the accumulated deficits amounted to a total debt of 423 billion. That's all interest. All of it. All interest. So, of that 235 billion, this economist David Weston points out, government spent a mere 37 billion for actual goods and services. The other 91.25% consisted of interest charges, which calculate out to the usurious rate of 1,043% borrowed from private finance companies. So clearly the major cause of our debt is not public services, but compounding interest charges owed to private finance companies, both foreign and domestic. So that's why they're going to tell you we have to privatize healthcare, we have to privatize hydro. All your public assets are going to be taken away. For what? Because government spending is way beyond, and guess what comes under government spending? When you look in their tables, it comes under government spending. Well, that's very vague, isn't it? And that's where they put all the interest. The government spent. When you hear on the news, the government spent so many billion. Yeah, but what on? Not on you. Not on your assets. Not saving anything. All going in compound interest, not straight interest. Compound interest. That's where our taxes go. They don't dare tell you that. $45 billion every year. Every year. Nothing goes down on the debt. That'll never go down. This is just interest. We pay that out every year. We pay that to private banking people. When our Constitution told us in 1867 that new money was going to be created by our government so that we wouldn't have to pay interest to private people. But that's where we are now. And now they're taking everything away that we've built over the years and we've worked for, because our government, has sold out a long time ago to the bankers, okay? So, as we're going backwards here. This is what happened in North America and to the Americans. Before 1913, they were issuing their own interest-free money. It was issued by Congress. You read in the booklet, you got all their history. But this is where ours fits in with theirs. And not many people talk about this. There was no fuss, there was nothing. But in the United States, there was a huge uproar. People were assassinated over speaking out about the money. I mean, McKinley, I have a little, I keep dates here, a very important dates. Years like 1776, the Declaration of Independence, the founding of the Illuminati by Adam Weishaupt. Same year, House of Rothschild formally founded. Same year, Adam Smith publishes The Wealth of Nations. So all these things happen, 1776, then you get another strange year. You're getting, first of all, Lincoln, well, first of all, Jackson, who got rid of the private bankers for his term. He was almost assassinated. The guy had 2 pistols. They both misfired, so he didn't get killed. He's the only one who actually got rid of the private banks and ended up with a surplus for the country, which he doled out among the states. He was practicing social credit. Jackson was back then. Then, after that, along came Lincoln and the Civil War. Well, as soon as Lincoln said, well, I paid for the army with United States money. Just, I didn't go to the money lenders. I created our own money, and I paid for that war we won. And he said, if I'm reelected, we'll be producing our own money again. Well, he was killed. They didn't want him to get reelected. That was done by the bankers, and it was even admitted by one of their stooges. Then Garfield, in 1881, Garfield was assassinated over the money. And then after that, I think McKinley as well. He was assassinated. Oh yeah, William McKinley, 1901, assassinations. These were all about the money. Even Kennedy. Kennedy actually did what Lincoln did. And I have pictures of the United States money that Kennedy issued over $4 billion just before they assassinated him. But that is in none of the books on JFK, not one of them. But I have Xeroxes of those bills, and I even have the letters. I even have copies of the letters from the Treasury Department that admit to that. So, and they're talking about the Federal Reserve here. And then it says, they've got here in their own little letter signed by the Assistant Deputy Treasurer, there's no need for the U.S. government to own the Federal Reserve Bank since they act as agents of the U.S. Treasury. Profits above a certain amount, he doesn't say how much, profits above a certain amount are returned to the Treasury pursuant to law. No amounts, nothing. So you see, they do admit to it, but they still won't tell you what's really happening. Then, this is the difference. They tried to write back and say that Kennedy really didn't do anything that was abnormal. And they say here that the currency that he put out was less than 1% of the currency now being issued. And it says here, please note the difference. This is somebody who wrote to them. Please note the difference between the amount required in circulation of 322 million and the amount issued by Kennedy of 4,292,000,000. A difference of 3,970,000,000, and Kennedy did that. And the U.S. notes were a series of 1963. They have not been issued since his assassination. Now, Lincoln issued 450 million of United States notes. He was assassinated after that. However, those notes cost the American people no interest right up to date and saved us, he's saying here, saved us $49 billion. Even the fact that Lincoln issued just enough to win the war saved the Americans $49 billion because our interest, the interest goes back to this. Same with the U.S. It's forever compounding. As we speak, it is compounding. It is never to be paid off. Any idiot or liar who gets on television and talks about paying off the debt, don't even, just click it off. And the people, they talk about paying down the deficit. So the deficit is the interest. So we don't need, this is a criminal act against citizens. That's why we never have enough money. We don't have, our housing is gone. They got rid of that. Soon the hydro will be privatized. And then the health, they're already, we talked about that in another class. And they're all getting their orders from these people. All these contracts come out from these people. And basically, I do have here, somebody always says to me, well, what are the names of these people who own the Federal Reserve? Okay, here they are. It is a privately held corporation owned by stockholders. And somebody went through a lot of trouble to get these names. So these are the Fed's principal owners. Rothschild Banks of London and Berlin, Lazard Brothers Banks of Paris, Israel Moses Seif Banks of Italy, Warburg Bank of Hamburg and Amsterdam, Lehman Brothers Bank of New York, the Kuhn Leb Bank of New York, Chase Manhattan Bank of New York, and Goldman Sachs Bank of New York. These interests own the Federal Reserve System through approximately 300 stockholders, all of whom are known to each other and are sometimes related to one another. So there you have it. these are the people who are up there now, and they are delegating to different governments who are nothing but branches of the Fed. That's all the governments are these days. They're just branches. They're branches of this group here. And so even as far back as 1913, as soon as the Fed came into the U.S., this amendment comes in here. Very quietly, very sneakily, not a word said about it, no vote, no nothing. So, and they realize and they know, and they don't want anybody to talk about the proper means of issuing money. A government bank, every country in the world, the ones the IMF are ruining, every country in the world, I don't care how little they have in resources, they can issue their own money and they can build up their own infrastructure without any help from any private IMF or any of those people. They have resources and they have people, and people are human resources. That's what they called us for the last 40 years. Not personnel, like in war years you were personnel, after that you're human resources. But at the same time they contradict that by saying, no, you're a liability. We have to support you. It's welfare, you fight for every little dime you get. But then they're calling you resources. And they admit that. And this one here, they admit that. They're judging who are the richest countries. Australia's number 1, we're number 2. And you know what they base it on? They base it on the resources and the education of the people in the country. So they know the people are not liabilities. So as things get built, as I said, bridges and buildings and healthcare and all that comes out, money is issued by the government, not a private bank, and it's issued with no interest on it at all. And it goes out as the people do perform the labor, intellectual labor, whatever. Now that's not happening anywhere on the planet. This whole planet is mortgaged. This is the planet. Look, here we are. There we are there. We're mortgaged. The whole damn globe is mortgaged by private bankers, private families who have coerced and blackmailed our governments into giving them the franchise to issue our money. Any country that issues bonds can issue its own money. But when private people issue our money and credit, they charge the government interest. But it's totally unnecessary. Any government that issues bonds can issue its own money. So we're not doing it this way. If we were doing it this way, the world would look like, well, another planet entirely. A planet where there's some honesty, decency, some evolution going on, but it's not. Even this country, if we went back to producing our own money at no interest, our debt would be gone. We would have homes for everybody. We would have health care for everybody. We would be using our own resources. Instead, what is happening? The people are being removed. The people are being depopulated. Everything taken from them that they own and they've worked for. So we're all going to be living shorter lives. This system is a system of death. It's a system of depopulation. And it's the best way of doing it because nobody can put a finger on it except that they know they're in debt. They can't afford certain doctors. They have to keep working till they drop. A lot of poor people just drop in their traces. Now, as I said, in the States, they're upping the retirement age to 73. Ludicrous. Let's make them work until they die because they've used up the Social Security. On what? Paying these guys. That's what's happening on this planet. It is not just a local thing, but I'm just telling you how it happened here. And now they're taking all our assets away to pay interest to these people. And they're making money on genetic foods and weird vaccinations and not having any housing and people lying in the street in a climate like this. It's ludicrous. This country is the second wealthiest country in the world, but are the people sharing any of it? No, they are not. They're not sharing any of it. Now, let me explain exactly how stupid this system is. How stupid, how crooked. This is what happens, and it happens here. When the United States needs extra money, because as many taxes as they charge, there's still never enough to pay these people. So it's really like a hamster in a cage. It's like a catch-22. Remember the movie Catch-22? That just keeps feeding into itself. They go to the Fed, okay, the U.S., they get bonds, they need, say, $1 billion, let's make it small. They go to the Fed takes the bonds, and the Fed then buys some nice thick paper, might cost them $500 in paper, and they churn out money, and they churn out credit. Now credit is money, even though credit is bookkeeping money. When you go into the bank, you get a loan, they write $50,000, of course from thin air in your account. That's money. It's not paper, but it's still money. So credit and money are the same. And as soon as they issue, they say, okay, here's your $1 billion. And the government takes the $1 billion and they go and they pay their bills, or they put up the bridge, or they do whatever they're doing with it. But at the same time, they have to give back to the Fed interest on the billion that the Fed only printed. It just printed it. What a scam, eh? I mean, no wonder they're so rich. So they pay interest on the $1 billion that cost the Fed $500 in paper to print. There. So now the interest goes back to the Fed. Did you ever hear of anything so insane in your life? This is what happens. Not only that, the Fed, they take these bonds the government's given them, they lend them out. They've used that to lend out. $1 billion? Oh, you can lend $10 billion then. They lend them all out, so they're making money on the bonds the government's given them. $500 has cost them for paper. They've issued the $1 billion. The government takes the $1 billion, goes off and pays whatever, and gives the Fed interest on $1 billion that they created out of nowhere. What a scam. I mean, just thinking, this is what's happening all over the world to all countries. So, the U.S. is certainly not lending at no interest to its government for building infrastructure. It's all coming through this here. This. Because these people in 1913 took the right of government to issue the tickets of exchange. And when they took that, they privatized the money supply. That is the first privatization of our money supply. Money is not a commodity. Money is tickets. It's your share in what you're contributing to the country. You share in the country's resources. Money should never have been turned into a commodity, but when private people are issuing it, it is a commodity. So George Soros can buy up all the Thai bahts. George Soros ruined Indonesia because you can do that with money now. You can bet on currencies of different countries. Now they're a commodity, not tickets of exchange at all. So all that's happening around the globe, the IMF, the International Mugging Fraternity, goes in there and they say, now we're going to lend to you, money they got like this, we're going to lend you this money, everything has to be restructured. Now that means you can no longer grow food crops that you're used to eating. We want you to grow these crops for export. And when you get the money for these crops you're exporting, you've got to pay us interest on this loan we're giving you. So Chavez said, no, get the hell out. I don't need your loan. So they pulled a coup on him, but his own army brought him back. But this is going on all the time, all over the place. See, they do not want anyone to know. You will never, don't bother wasting your money taking economics courses. They'll never tell you any of this, okay? People have come here with 4 years of economics, and I've said, okay, you know how money's created? Duh, the government? No, it's supposed to, but it doesn't. So don't waste your money on those courses. So now that they've got all this interest, now that they've got that, then the next step is they go from America, and now they're going to every country in the world where they want to get the resources in payment for loans, exorbitant interest. They loaned Latin America $80 billion in the 90s. You know what the IMF got back for that $80 billion? $418 billion. And they say they're helping. They're helping themselves. That's all. So all of these trade agreements are hooked into the international banking machine. And this is how it works. So now, when Jack Layton and Joe Comartin and Bill Blakey, when Jack Layton was first elected, and I saw them on 2 TV shows, one of them Michael Corns, by the way, and he was just appalled at what he was hearing. I don't know whether he didn't understand it or he was appalled because he realized they let the cat out of the bag. They said, if we ever become federal, the federal government, we will immediately take all the loans that are in foreign banks and private banks, and incrementally we will phase them back into our Bank of Canada so that we are not paying that $45 billion every year in interest. We need that money for other things. We are not going to allow private people to issue loans to our government. You see? They said that. Now I noticed in the last 3 months there hasn't been a peep. So after they said that on 2 different shows, you can bet that somebody like McCallum would come to them and say, look, do you think it's wise to talk about going back to the Bank of Canada and all that? And I told you what happened when I had the debate with him on, what comes on 26? What's that show Abby Lewis had? Oh, I forget. Counterspin. McCallum was there, this was about 4 years ago, and I started debating with him on the money issue. And he squirmed out of it, he said, but I'm not in the bank anymore, I'm now an MP. And I said, well now you're even more dangerous. And of course then they took the mic away from me, and didn't let me say another word. But anyway, this is what he said after the show was over. One of my students, a group of my students were there, and one of them came to me and he said, I just overheard McCallum talking to Abby Lewis. And I said, well, what did he say? And he said, he's saying to Abby, you're not really going to do a show on the Bank of Canada, are you? Because Abby had promised over the air, he said, I will do a show on the Bank of Canada and the history of it, and how we can use it, never happened. And when I talked to Abby about 2 months ago when he was at that Blurred Cinema thing that went on, and I went to the mic and I explained what the debt was, he went to the mic right after me and he said, ha ha ha, we can't just print money, you know, to make it look as if what I had said was entirely off the wall. So I went up to him after, and, well, yes, I did. I chewed him out. And I didn't care who heard me. I said, how dare you? I said, you know what you promised? And now you've just gone and said the opposite. And he said, well, you people in monetary reform, you're obsessed with this. I said, yes, and you're obsessed with shutting it up, aren't you? So anyway, that was my thing with Abby Lewis. So he and his wife, you see, there's all kinds of books about, oh, no logo, let's just shut all this down. I'm sorry. If you can cut off this arm, it'll grow another one. Until you hit this octopus in the head, nothing's going to happen. So these people are making money on their books. Oh, I'm great. I'm an activist. You know, I'm a hero. The same with, what's her name, Maud Barlow. I've asked her many times, Maud, and she told me, she said, you're the only one who ever explained the bank to me, and now I understand. Now, that was 5 years ago. We had a picture together, huggy, huggy, kissy, kissy. I haven't heard another word out of her about the bank since. Okay, so they know, but they aren't talking, and God knows what was said to them, why they aren't talking. I don't know. But they aren't, so we're not going to get anywhere with the so-called activists, career activists. It's more about their career and very little about the activist stuff. Anyway, this is now happening all over the world, and all these people, like the ones that came out against the FTAA, that's another agreement, all the Latin Americans that were down there, I mean, you're gonna have to fight every single arm, and it won't matter because this is still there. And they'll just come out with more, and you know what? Nobody gets in to see what's written in these agreements. It's all behind closed doors. We don't know. It's like this referendum here. Behind closed doors, nobody knew. Suddenly, they just decided they were going to take away honest money from government, and they were going to let these crooks issue the money, charge the government interest. So that means the more we work and the more we produce, the more we go into debt. The more we go into debt, because all the money we're borrowing, not from our own bank, we're borrowing all this money. So every time we produce something, build something, we owe them more interest. Do you see why we're going to lose all our assets? Why? Now some people say, oh, I'm going to get into the corporate world. I will make money. I will escape all this. Maybe. Or you could be cut off. You could be downsized. You won't get, I have family in the States. And I've asked one of them who works for a big corporation, I said, when you retire, are they going to keep paying your huge health premiums every month, $600 a month, $1,000 a month, just for him and his wife? He said, no, we'll have to pay that. I said, well, how can you expect to go on living in this house when you're retired at 50-something? He said, I don't know. Maybe we'll have to get a smaller place. So nothing. It doesn't matter if you're in the corporate world unless you're into the scamming, like unless you're the Conrad Black or, you can do some other scams, you're still going to be cast by the wayside. So they want Canada to be in the same position as the U.S. We're nothing to them but a resource cupboard, okay? The Latin America is free labor, and we're free resources, and it's going to go from Iraq's oil to Canada's water. Watch for it, because it's going to happen. And it's all allowed to happen. We have no defense, because we do not produce our own interest-free money. They have all the power. They've got the printing machine. Whenever they need 500 or billions, they can just make it. They can do the credit. They can print the bills. Countries now have to come to these private people begging for credit. Give me a good Canada. All the countries have a credit rating. And you're asking yourself, okay, why would a whole country have to be like me and need a credit rating? I mean, Visa's not that big. No. But these people, if these people say that you no longer have a credit rating and you're tied into their system and you don't produce your own money, new money. We're not talking about any money but new money, understand? Once it gets out there, and private banks will still be here, but they'll only be allowed to lend what they actually have. Right now, they can lend 400 times what they actually have. They do not lend your deposit, okay? They do not. And we're going into these, I'm going to do some of these myths now about banking that you might think. They do not lend depositors money. So this is the state the world is in now. And this scam, it's insane. Who could get away with this? But they're getting away with it. They are getting away with it. And during the Depression in the U.S., this group, these people that are supposed to be the agent, like he said in the letter, for the U.S. government, they now own all the choicest pieces of property, all the huge buildings. Look around downtown here. Who owns the biggest buildings? Right in the center of town. They're all banks. They're all banks.
So why are
Add it up. The poorer we get, the trillions the banks are hauling it in. Doesn't that ring a bell? They're getting richer and richer. We're getting poorer and poorer. And who said, why don't we stop them?
Well, I said, like, how do we stop it?
How we stop it is going to be your homework until we come back in April, because knowing all this, I'm going to expect you people to get out there and do phone-ins and write government and whatever you can bring to the attention of the public. You have lots of stuff here. I'm counting on you to go to different meetings and copy this again. Whichever ones you feel are pertinent, copy them and bring them. You don't have to understand this and down to the last detail. All you need to know is the concept. And the concept is that countries are supposed to, like back here, countries are supposed to issue their own money interest-free. That is what they're supposed to do. That's what the American Revolution was about. Why did they have it? Now we get over to Europe here. They had it because, not because of the tax on tea. See, don't take a history course either, please. It's all omissions, it's all errors and omissions, all of it. Don't waste your money on a history course. Stick to engineering, math, whatever. But don't bother paying for history or economics, even anthropology. It's so outdated. It's totally outdated. They don't teach it yet. But anyway, in Europe, okay, before the American Revolution, you might say the Battle of Waterloo was when the Rothschilds took over England. They took over the Bank of England. You know about the scam he pulled. He let everybody think that Napoleon had won. Well, he hadn't. And so they saw Rothschild standing by his pillar, and he had little signals for his people that were working for him. And they saw him letting go of all the British consols, which were British bonds. Okay, that was the country, Britain. The bonds, he was selling them all. And when they all got down to like this much off the ground, he bought them all up. Everybody saw him selling them, so they sold all theirs. Idiots. Sold all theirs. Oh, you must know. So Napoleon's won. Oh God, the country's not, our bonds are worth nothing. Get rid of them. Everybody else sold them. And as soon as they got the news that Napoleon hadn't won, you know, they realized what he'd done. But by then, he bought them all up when they were down to the ground like this. So he actually owned the Bank of England, owned England at that point, 1815. That was 1815. So 300 years of this kind of scamming, this is our modern history, has gone on until now today. They aren't happy that they're running the whole world and controlling all the corporations who have to come to them. Don't forget all these corporations that Naomi's always burbling about have to go to the banks to do what they do first, but the banks are never mentioned. The banks are the biggest corporations on the globe, and other corporations need their support. So that's another reason why we really don't, the only weapons we have now are information and mass consciousness to say, no, we're not putting up with this anymore. I mean, it would take a march on Ottawa that would start in Vancouver and collect people till finally the whole country ends up over there saying, God damn you, get back to this. We're not going to be cheated and ripped off anymore. We worked too hard. We built this country, and now it's being robbed right out from under us. So since 1815, more and more of this has gone on. So when the Americans had the revolution, it was because the Bank of England would not allow the colonies to use and issue their own money. They started issuing what they call colonial scrip, S-C-R-I-P. And they issued it according to what was being produced and the needs of the people. And then when Ben Franklin went to England, and he saw England, there was poor lying in the streets, there were debtors' prisons. Oh, you went into prison? This is really smart, eh? You owe a huge debt, so you're thrown into prison. This means, of course, that you can never pay the debt because you're in prison. But this is what happened. So, you see, it's not really about the debt. It's not really about the debt at all. It's what the debt can do. The debt can control us. We are controlled by our debts. Yes, we are. If you think you want to spend the winter on the Riviera, well, look at your bank account, figure out what mortgage payments you have to hand over this winter, and see if you can go there. But this is what's been going on. So when the Americans set up, and they were the only and the first country, I don't know when Guernsey actually did this, how far back, it says there, but the Americans were actually the first nation who said, we're going to break away from this banking debt. We're going to issue our own money. And then they said Congress, when they won the war, they said Congress will issue money at no interest. And the reason that it was going to be issued by Congress is because Congress was the only political group that was answerable directly to the people. Okay, Lincoln first started out in Congress. So people in, well, it's so crooked today, it's just forget about it, there's nobody in there that can't be bought. So that's what's happened. Governments have handed over our assets, our right to our own tickets of exchange. Governments have handed those over, all of that over to private banking families, okay? And like it says, a lot of them are related to each other, and they just laugh themselves silly. They laugh in their cups. Even Rothschild said himself, I don't know when, maybe in the 1900s, but he said, can you think of anything more absurd than that a nation would go to a private person for credit? And they do. Nations go, cap in hand, on their knees, please, and whatever bank it is, give us some credit, give us a credit rating. This is the most insane, criminal thing that has ever happened. Forget alien serpents and all that garbage. They couldn't do nearly as much to us as this has done. They could not. If they came here and if they landed here, the first people up the gangplank would be the IMF. They will lend you money with sharp lapels. So it doesn't matter what they look like. They would be in the same deep doo-doo as we all are now, within a very few years. So this is the biggest secret, the biggest secret. And they want it kept secret. And that is what is happening. Now, we'll go into some of these myths that people, and this is another horrible thing. I'm going to read to you now. This is something else I actually couldn't believe when I first read it. Now, Lorne Nystrom, the NDP, actually wrote this letter to my editor. And he's letting her know, he's saying, the Bank of Canada has turned over its Canada Savings bonds to a U.S. company to administer. Now, this U.S. company is called EDS. Now, administer, and EDS is, oh, talk about crooked. I have a file like this on them. Okay. EDS Canada, a wholly owned subsidiary of EDS Corporation of Texas. So, an EDS company in Texas is administering the bonds, Bank of Canada bonds. There's an IMF guy in the Bank of Canada now. I don't know his name, but I mean, I know he's in there. And this is what is happening. So if we cannot get the word out and get this stopped, but we're going to lose everything that we've ever built, everything that we own. We're going to be losing our lives, of course. That comes next. Because these people are saying this whole thing now blooms into something that says we need war to boost the economy. You see, war now is looked on as a part of the economy. If we don't have war, the economy will go down because these weapons manufacturers make billions. They need oil to make war. They make billions. But it has nothing to do, we're all, in the end, we're all going to die and fry because of this economic scam. It has in other words, it has nothing to do with economics. It is a financial scam, calling itself economics. These are two different things. Don't ever think a financier, you know what that means? This is somebody who lends. I'm going to finance you. What does that mean? I'm lending money to you to do a certain thing. You owe me interest and I want a big cut. That's what a financier is. Economy, okay? An economy is about no waste, okay? Saving. That's what an economy is. This has nothing to do with saving the earth, saving anything we eat. Everything can be poisoned. It's good GDP. The more messes, the more spills, the more cleanups, the more wars, the GDP goes up. All they care about is how many financial transactions are done. That's what the GDP is. It has nothing to do with your health or having a decent society. It has to do with, gee, if we have a few more oil spills, the GDP will go up even higher. It'll be jobs. That's the other scam. Jobs. Everybody is fighting for jobs. I remember I was outside the legislature once. There was a huge protest group there when Harris first came in. And it was Labour. All the people from Labour were there. We want this and jobs and all of that. And there was one old man in the front. I shouldn't swear, but anyway. There was one old guy in the front and he said, "F the jobs, what about life?" And all these union people were there. So jobs, life is not about the job. Unless you have the kind of work that you're in love with, okay, then it's part of your life. But saying that in order to buy anything or live, you have to have a job, is not true. You only have to have an income. You don't need a job to buy anything. All you need is an income. And those paper pushers on Wall Street will tell you that. Hey, I don't have a job. I push paper all day. I don't produce anything. I don't do anything. Hey, I've got 100 times what you have. Jobs are only 15% of the economy at the best of times. The rest is government, work, labor, what have you, and the stock market. That's the rest of it. The stock market. And that's all fraud now. Poor Martha Stewart, she was just a drop in the bucket. They just used her as an example. I mean, she was nothing. What she did was nothing about this much to what they were all doing, but they picked on her. So anyway, these two things are completely different. And they know that. They know all of this. They know about Douglas's work. That's why they shut him up. They spent millions shutting up Douglas because they knew he was right. He made sense. He was logical. He was an honors mathematician. He was an engineer for the Crown. He was a brilliant man. And he told them that. He said, "You're not doing it right. You have to base it on the resources of the country. You have to have money issued at no interest. And it has to be, you have to have a dividend for people. You can't have things like welfare and all that humiliating garbage. You have to have something called a dividend, because these people have to have a share in the resources of their country. They're all building it. And this economy, so-called, well, this financial muck is based on free labor in prisons, volunteer. Only in Europe did they give a woman a pension who's just been a wife and raised kids. They consider that a job, but not here. So this whole so-called economy, basically, and most of it is this, stock frauds. And then there's the government that's involved a lot with these people that are doing the frauds. And the rest of it, it's all volunteer stuff. It's mothers, it's volunteers working in hospitals and all over, and it's prison labor. It's all based on free labor. Now, these agreements, another thing about these agreements is that they're arranged so that not one country will have all that's needed to produce whatever it is they're producing. In other words, they're going to make sure that the parts for everything are spread all over in different countries, so all the countries are interdependent. So it's like dominoes. They knock one down, another one falls. Not like the old days where, America had a manufacturing base, we had a manufacturing base, and if we made a refrigerator or whatever, all the parts everything was made here. No, they don't want that. With these agreements, they might have some parts made in Latin America, something else made in Germany, they all come together somewhere else. It ties everyone into their scam. They don't want a country producing something and they have all the little parts for it right there. We have it right there, we export it, that's fine. They don't want that. So the trade agreements are tied in directly to the banking scam. Directly, they're part of it. It just means that now instead of local like nations, now locally, now they want to, it's going to be global. Everybody is going to have to surrender because everybody is going to be interlocked into their same scam, depending on these products and exports. So now instead of saying, okay, a country, before it exports, first of all, it has to see that all the citizens have what they need. Then, whatever's extra, they export that. It's not like that anymore. No, people in these countries, Africa, Latin America, people are starving, there's famines. What are they doing? They're doing crops that the IMF told them to grow. You grow that to export and you'll pay our interest. And they're not growing what they used to eat and need. They're not doing that anymore. So it's horrible, and it's all coming out of this. This is what nobody talks about, nobody wants to talk about. Now when you go to the bank, You will think, this is an article I did a while ago.
It's okay.
Oh, okay. Is it my bracelet I have on? Is it this?
Yeah.
And I want to read you this too, it's just one sentence. Michael Parenti is very well known, he's famous. He's also a historian. He said here, when he's talking about the economics, it says here, Bush announced his war on terrorism. What he left unannounced was his campaign to advance the agenda of the reactionary right at home and abroad. This included rolling back an already mangled federal human services sector, reverting to deficit spending. Okay, deficit spending, that's just what it says, is paying interest to private bankers. That's where you get your deficit, from the interest. So, reverting to deficit spending for the benefit of a wealthy creditor class. Now, who are they? Who are the wealthy creditors? Are the banks. Who else could be a wealthy creditor unless a bank? So the wealthy creditor class, increasing the repression of dissent, see, and expanding to a still greater magnitude the budgets and global reach of the U.S. military and the national security state. And it all, and the repression and the control all comes from the fact that we are all in debt. Even the people who aren't in debt, they don't have anything extra. And what you're telling you is no matter how much money you have, this country's in debt. Okay, so we'll go into the myths now, because what they're telling you is a lie. It's impossible for a country to go into debt. It's impossible for a country to go bankrupt. Even if it has mud and it can grow food, the mud can build adobe houses, and it has people. People are part of the resources. So no country can go bankrupt. That's another lie they're foisting on you. Bankruptcy is when the IMF says, oh, you can't pay us your interest anymore? You're bankrupt. You'll come in now. You see? It's all a huge scam. It's not needed. It's not necessary. And these people, they will fight. If you think you've seen blood in other wars, as Rothschild said when somebody asked him, when is the best time to buy? I'm quoting him now, when the blood runs in the streets. That was his reply. War is money. War is profitable. If it wasn't, they wouldn't do it so much. It's profitable because it belongs to that scam. So now, we're going to go through these myths that they've got people believing. Myth one, I've told you about. The government prints the money. No, government does not create our money. It should, but it doesn't. But people instinctively, if you ask the guy on the street who's never even heard of monetary reform, you say, well, who prints the money and who? He'll say the government, just right off the top of his head, because he knows instinctively that's how it should be. And he really thinks that's how it is. But yet, if that's how it was, why would we have an enormous debt? You see, the debt belies what the myth is. All right? If government was printing our money at no interest, we would not have the horrendous debt. So that disproves that. Now, myth number two, we can pay off Canada's debt. Absolutely impossible. It's compounding, it's not straight interest, it's compounding all the time. So we'll keep running deficits because the deficits are nothing but interest. So that's not true either. Then, myth three, the banks lend only deposits. No, they don't. They don't touch your deposit. If they did, you wouldn't be able to go and get it out. If they did, and you said, then you would get interest on it. So the only deposits they actually take in are when you have something like $50,000 or $100,000, and you say, I'll let you have it for a year. Then they lock it in for a year, and you'll get what? 4% at the most on your money, but it's locked in for a year. You can't touch it. So that is the only time they use your deposit. It's like a GIC or something like that. But your regular account, even your savings, no. No, they do not use that. They don't have to. So what do they do? When you go in, now this is how the bank creates money. When you go in there and you need a loan, and you give them collateral, whatever it is, your house, your Maserati, whatever, and they have collateral, they will make you a loan, and what they'll do, they'll just put it in the computer, and that'll be under your name. And then in another book, you'll have it over here, and when you're paid off, it'll just cancel out. They do not take this money from other depositors that they are lending you. No. They just pull it out of thin air. It is not backed by anything. They call that, though, a deposit. Now that's why the banker can say to you, as McMillan would, McCallum, if you asked him, he'd say, yes, we only lend deposits, neglecting to tell you that they can create their own deposits simply by putting the amount of your loan in their computer. So you're borrowing $50,000, they put that in the computer, you can write checks on that, the checks go back and forth, you pay your debts or addition to your house, whatever you're doing, you're paying your builders, your debts with the $50,000, you're writing checks. But if you ever get to that point and you have a loan, I want you to go to them with your briefcase when you sign the papers that day, and I want you to tell them that you want the $50,000 that day in your briefcase and tell them what denominations you want it in. See what happens. Do you think you will get that? No, you will not. So, you can write checks on that. It doesn't exist, it's just numbers. You write checks on it. In the meantime, you have to pay interest on it from the day you sign up. So say that they're charging you, say, 6% interest. Now wait a minute, where are you going to get that? They're not creating any real money. A bank hasn't got the means or the authority to create one piece of cash money. Nothing. So where are you going to get the interest? Say that it's 6 cents on every dollar. They don't even have the right or the means to make 6 cents. No, they can only put numbers in their computer. But you've got to pay that interest. Now, if your government is only creating 2% of interest-free money, how are you going to pay this interest? Well, you're going to get the money from more of these people that create money from thin air. You've got to borrow again. So for every person who can pay off his debt, there will be 10 others who cannot, who never will, because there isn't enough interest-free money floating around for them to use to pay off this interest. Not going to happen. So they write that in the book. There's $50,000 there and you're using it. And when you've come to the end of your mortgage, they just do that. The interest, the real interest that they've gotten from you, say your house cost you $100,000, well, after 25 years or whatever, you probably pay for that house 3 times. Anyone who has a mortgage, I want you to go home and take the time to figure out how many times you will buy your house before you actually own it. Go home and figure that one out. Because that is what happens to all the prices. Everything you buy has interest added. Interest that corporations have to borrow. It's not, you'll never see it on the price tag. But everything you buy has silent interest included. Okay? So this is what's happened when you borrow from the bank. Now, if you can't make your payments, well, they can come and get your house. They can take what you have, whatever you've given for collateral, and they can sell it quickly, not even at the price it's worth, just so they get their money out, and you're left with some little coin left over. See, they really, really want the interest to keep coming in. That's why it's compounded. That's why it's compounded for the government, because debt is a means of total control. If they want a war, you'll have to go. If they want this, you'll have to do it, like those countries and everybody here. We won't be having, our hydro will go sky high, our health care will be privatized. We'll end up just sitting on the curbstone. You might as well be selling pencils, because the real interest is what they're counting on. So they might get $80,000 extra for something that cost you $20,000, but you had to get a loan from them. So you'll pay 4 times over for whatever it is, and they're going to collect this in real money from you. That's not money that you dragged out of thin air. It isn't. You worked for that. You're going to bring it into them and pay the interest with money you worked for. And they're lending you, all they had to do was put numbers in the computer. That's it. That's how they get so rich. That's how they are worth trillions. You could be worth trillions if you had your own printing machine and you could lend it, this is what happens. So they do not lend deposits. When you bring in cash and put it in your account, they don't touch that. They don't need to. They use the deposits. Say that a small bank has 10 million on deposits. They use that as a base to lend out 100 million. Nowadays it's 400 million. That's how the banking system works. That's why they have all the big buildings. They own countries. The people at the top of the banking scam, the international bankers, dictate to governments. They dictate to them. This is what's happening all over the world. So the next time you are eligible for a loan, you go in with your briefcase and ask them for all. You want them? I want the money today. I'm going on a world cruise. 50,000 here. 20s, 10s should be, easy to spend. I want it all here. You won't be able to, I'm sorry. Then, another myth is, they say that Canada's assets are low. In other words, what we own in the country, we don't really own as much as we think we do. Well, you know how they get away with that. They get away with that the same way Paul Martin said that he balanced the budget a few years ago. This is what he did. And this is what they've been doing for the last 40 years. Now, we have assets. We'll just do the physical ones for now because it's easier to explain. Say that you need to build a new bridge. You need to build a bridge, so it costs $50 million. The bridge is up. Now, they do not use proper accounting. If they were accountants, they would not get hired. And they would be caught diddling the books because this is what they do. They build the bridge, it costs $50 million, and in the books, in the government books under assets, they list the bridge as worth $1. $1. Where does the other 49 million and some odd change go? They call it an expense and put it into the deficit. Why do they put it into the deficit? Because the bigger the deficit, the more social programs they can cut. That's what it's for. To cut social assets. That's why they make it as big as they can. That's why they lie. A normal accountant and expense accounting, this is what's done. You spend $50 million, and maybe for 20 years after that, you depreciate it. So much every year. That's bookkeeping. That's the way it works. Then when the bridge gets down to its last lot of depreciation, then you build another bridge or whatever. But in the meantime, the bridge is what? It's an investment. It's an investment. But they call it an expense. Okay? And put it into the deficit. That's what they do to all our assets. Now, this is like you having $50,000 in the bank. You put it down on a house. You move into the house. You have equity already building up. But you've got your $50,000 spent, so you call all your friends and you say, I'm broke. My expenses came to $50,000. Can you bring me a bag of food? This is what they're doing here. Do you think you would get away with it on your income tax if you buy a house and you spend $50,000 on the house, but you have equity, you have a property, you're living there, and you do your income tax form and you say, $50,000 in expenses. I don't have to pay taxes. Look at my expenses this year. But you made an investment. Now, that bridge, all our assets are investments. Yes, they are. And an accountant would look at this with what they're doing, and they've done that. I know an accountant who talked to us one night, and he said, this is crooked bookkeeping. No decent accountant would ever call an investment that depreciates each year an expense and knock it off all in the 1 year. That's what they do. Expense, 49 million into the deficit, more now. Every asset that they build. Are you getting your heads around this one?
It's hard.
Isn't it hard and really unbelievable to think that they do this with the books? So that we believe, look, the deficit is huge. Now, the interest is in here, that they're paying the banks, the interest every year. And the debt itself, what is that called? That comes under government spending. They're all called by very vague names so that you won't know what the hell they're actually doing. It's like the old bean game, you know, which one, where is it? Where did we spend it? Where did it go? So anyway, this is what they've done with everything for the last 40 years. Huge deficit. In fact, the budget people in Reagan's government admitted it. The guy admitted it. I've got his quote right here. I'll read it to you. It's just hilarious. Where is it? Anyway, I may not be able to find it. The point is, he said, the Reagan government, they said, we grew the deficit on purpose to get rid of the social programs and assets. They admitted that. They said the deficit was to get rid of the social things. That's what we used it for. So it's a phony deficit. The deficit doesn't exist. Not the one they're doing with these assets and investments and calling them expenses. So the year that Martin balanced the budget and everyone was saying how wonderful he was, you know what he did? Say you had all these assets down here, they're all in here and the deficit's huge. All he did was, he took the investments out of the deficit and he put them back under here at their real value. He put them over here again at their real value. And what happened? The assets went up, the deficit went down, and he balanced the budget. And this was what that wonderful man did. Now I went on the air and I told him what he did. No one ever called in to contradict me. Nobody. I said, this is what he did. He simply, the mistakes, I called them mistakes, that they made for the last 40 years, they actually, for 1 year, made it right. They actually did for 1 year what they should have done all the way along. They took all these investments that they called expenses, they put them back where they actually belonged, and that balanced the budget.
How can they flip-flop their bookkeeping system like that? This year we'll do our books this way, next year we'll do them another way, year after that we're back to where we started?
You asked Martin. I've asked him.
They should be in jail.
I've asked him and all he does is he starts twitching. anything, when I've seen Martin do interviews, he's like a one-man band. You ask him something like that, he'll get so many facial tics, he'll have to go home. Anyway, he's not going to answer you. And he's the guy that's due to come in here. So, that's where the deficit comes from. So our assets are not low. No, they aren't. We have trillions and trillions in assets. We have 10 times in assets what they've told us we have. And of course, myth 5, I've explained that we have a reserve in the Bank of Canada. No, we don't. The U.S. has 3%. We had 3%. We've got zip, zilch, nothing now. And that means that allows them, those private banks, they have no collateral, they have nothing to tie them down now. They can go sky high, they can lend whatever, and we won't know. They can get away with lending more than 400 times what they lend. And the other myth is that a nation can go bankrupt. No, it can't. And I'm going to explain to you why it can't. I've already said, even if you have a country and there's only mud and people, you can't go bankrupt because mud will grow stuff, mud will make houses. In no country is that poor. But even if you were that poor, you still would not be bankrupt. Well, if you believe them, because they're about financing. They're not about economy. They know nothing about economy. And what they do know, they're going to keep from you. So, this last myth about a nation going bankrupt, like Chavez when he said, go to hell, you know, I don't need you. Because some of the people in Latin America who understand liberation theology, which is not a form of Marxism, by the way. Sharing does not mean you're a communist, although most Americans think that. If you believe in sharing anything or have any social program, even my relatives down there, they're very kind to me, they're nice to me, but I mean, they actually say to me, but of course you're a communist.
The Pope said so.
Whatever, yeah. But anyway, the myth that a nation can go bankrupt, absolute nonsense. And I'll prove it with the Depression of '29. Now, in the Depression of '29, when the Depression hit, stockbrokers were leaping out windows. People ended up for 10 years going back and forth the country on trains, hobos. People were working for food. I mean, people lost everything. Even a lot of them on Wall Street who weren't in on the scam. They lost everything too, because only the people at the top are working this, and they, you know, they get the funds. Anyway, the first thing that you have to ask yourself is, when they had the Depression in 1929, and people were in bread lines, what was missing? What didn't they have? For instance, the day before the Depression hit, they had farms, and they had mines, and they had rivers and lakes and gold, and they had all kinds of resources in America. And the day after, people were starving and in bread lines. Well, what happened? Did their wealth, and they know resources are wealth, and I say this just so it'll stick in your mind, did some huge mothership come down from some other planet, scoop up all their mines and farms and fields and lakes and gold, scoop it all up and go away to some other planet so there was nothing? No. The day after the Depression, the same resources were there. They didn't go anywhere. The wealth of the country was still where it was the day before the Depression. So, what was missing? There's only one thing missing. The tickets of exchange. The money. The tickets of exchange were missing. So, the farmer, what's the point in growing more food than for my family, because there's no money, nobody can give me any money for it, so I'll just grow for me, okay? What's the point in having stores or any of this, because the tickets of exchange were gone. Now, how did they disappear? Very simply. The Federal Reserve was already in there since 1913. What did they say to themselves? We want to grab up as much of this country's resources as we can. So what do? They've done it before. The 13 wasn't the first time they did it. They came in 13. Before that, they caused other depressions by pulling the purse strings back on the money. So in 1929, they decided they wanted a lot more of the U.S. than they had before. So this is what they did. Now, you know how money is created, through loans. Money is created through loans. That's how private banks create money. Loans to government, loans to you. That's how they created the money. That's all that was circulating. So what they did was, they called in the loans they had out. They didn't issue any new loans. And they called the other ones in. So what happened? If the only money circulating is loan money, checks going from bank to bank, and the loans get called in, what happens? The loans are the money. This is the sad thing. The loans, from 1913 on, loans were the money of the country. Yes. There was some cash, but loans basically were the money of the country. Okay? And as soon as the country got used to having their money owned by private people in the form of loans, then they decided they'd pounce. So when they pounced and they called in the loans they had out and they didn't renew any more loans, they cut down, in that short period, 1/3 of all the money was removed from America. okay, was gone. Now, if you were a businessman then, and you couldn't renew your business loan, and you had stocks on the stock market, and they suddenly said to you, we're not renewing your loan, and we're calling in the one you've got now, we want it paid now, and you had stocks, what would you have to do? You have to withdraw all your stocks from the market, okay? Pay off that loan they just called in. What did that cause on the stock market? Okay, dropped out. See, what they tell you in economics class, they tell you the opposite. The stock market crashed. Everybody goes to little parrots. Oh yeah, stock market crash, that was the cause. Well, hey, how did the stock market crash? But it crashed, and then it was depression. No, they called in all the loans. People grabbed their stocks out of the market. The stock market crashed, but it happened after this was done. If you had stocks and all of a sudden your loan wasn't renewed, your business was failing, you didn't want to lose it, you'd go and take all your stocks out to pay. Of course you would. That's the first thing you would grab. So that's what happened then in 1929. Now, they could have, to bring people out of that muck, they could have started creating money at no interest, but they didn't. They decided to let it go on for 10 years. Till 39, after 10 years, they owned the Federal Reserve, and the 12, the districts owned almost everything belonging to America. In fact, today, the people in America owe 3 times the assets of America to the Fed and their bankers. So in 39, this is another myth. In 39, they decided they'd have a war so that people would think the war brought them out of the Depression. No. What they did was they just started creating more money and lending again. They put the money back in the supply so they could have another war. But at the same time, they wanted people to believe that the war just happened, and that if it weren't for the war, they wouldn't be out of the Depression. And they did that because they were planning more wars, and they wanted people to think that the war brought the economy up. And that's what they still tell people today. The war will bring the economy up. But all they really did was, they gave that 1/3 they took, they put it back into the economy, that they call an economy. It's not really, it's a financial scam. But they made more loans, and as they made more loans and put the 1/3 back, things started happening again. People started producing because people could buy, and then they started the war, but they wanted people to think the other way around, that the war saved them. They've got to make you think that wars save the economy so that you will be in favor of letting your children go and get blown to bits. So, and then the war, of course, came along. See, so a country cannot go bankrupt. As long as it has people and resources, it can never go bankrupt. But these people will tell you they're the financiers, and they've got the whole planet, except for Chavez and a few others, convinced that nobody can develop their resources without the help of a private banker. They don't want anyone to even remember that they had central banks at one point who issued money at no interest. They don't want us to remember it. They don't want Americans to remember it. Nobody. So this is what happened there. And then everybody believed, oh yeah, the war brought us right out of the Depression. So then when they want to have other wars, people still believe this crap. Oh yeah, it got us out of the Depression. Well, we have to sacrifice lives, but after all, it helps the economy. So you see, the death, this is a death scam. If you could call anything the Death Star, you could call the Earth the Death Star now. And the Darth Vaders at the top of it are running it. So that's what's going to happen if people are not educated about money. If you don't know the history of the monetary history, you will not connect the dots. You will not know. You might as well just memorize a few little bits and pieces, and that's what you get when you go to school. They have never told pupils yet the real cause of the American Revolution. Never. It's always about the tax on tea. Oh God, yeah, like the pioneers are so in love with tea. Oh God, they're taxing the tea. We have to have a war. What crap. But if you say it enough, you know, it's like that, build it and they will come, you know? You keep repeating and building the propaganda and they will believe it. So that's what happened in America. So that's how they convinced the country that it was bankrupt, depression, nothing could be done. Meantime, what was still there? All the resources were there and the people were there to use those resources and manufacture things. Everything was still there. So that's how dangerous it is to let private people issue your money, because then they can decide when they're going to give you a depression. They can decide that when they're going to give you a war. In fact, in 1812, Rothschild did say to the Americans, he said, if you do not let my bank into the United States, I will give you a war and depression and thousands will die. And that's exactly what he did, and that's what happened. So, then you got some honest presidents like Jackson, people with guts, who knew all this. When Jackson had to leave the White House because he was getting older, blacks and whites together, thousands of them, cried, gathered around the White House and cried. I mean, he was even more beloved than Kennedy. More beloved than Lincoln even. Because a lot of people hated Lincoln. Because he said, I'm not interested in whether they're slaves or not slaves. I'm interested in keeping the Union together. If I have to do it by freeing the slaves, I will. But that was not his primary aim. His aim was to keep the Union together. But Jackson's primary aim was just what he said. He said, I will kill those banks. He said, I will get them out of here. The people should not have to pay interest on money that's coming out from their own government. And I will destroy those bankers. And he did. And yet I went to a LaRouche meeting and I heard this LaRouche, you know, the guy that's on the verge of eternity, standing there and saying, well, Jackson was a piece of filth. Well, why was he a piece of filth? Because he didn't like Hamilton. LaRouche idolizes Hamilton. Who was Hamilton? Hamilton was a monarchist. Hamilton thought the president should have a lifelong term. Hamilton's first bank in the U.S. was owned by Hamilton and 4 of his pals, who did collect interest on the money. So you see, if you don't know history, you can be taken in by anything. But Jackson, of course, and Lincoln, and Kennedy, and McKinley, of course, he was assassinated. Most of them were assassinated. McKinley, Garfield. It was all about the money. Who was going to own and issue the money? And that's why they were assassinated. So then we get up to the Depression, and before the Depression, of course, in 1917, the Russian Bolshevik so-called revolution, remember, all the bankers contributed to that. There's a whole list of them in Sutton's books. He's got Wall Street and the Rise of Hitler is an excellent book. Wall Street and the Bolshevik Revolution is another one. They have to have enemies fighting each other. It's all part of the scam. And they profit from wars. They lend to both sides. But the one that they want to win, they don't lend him quite as much. They lend to both sides, but when they pick the winner, they get the winner more, lend the winner more than the loser that they're planning. Okay? And that started back in the time of Napoleon and at Waterloo. So when this Bolshevik Revolution, Trotsky was in New York staying with Rockefeller. Trotsky his name was really Bernstein, but he wanted people to think he was Russian or something. And he was staying with Rockefeller. Well, Rockefeller gave him $10,000 pocket money, and Woodrow Wilson gave him a special passport, and we caught him when he was leaving from Halifax. Canadians took him off the boat and said, we know where the hell you're going, to Russia, to cause another big stink. We're not letting you go. They jailed him. So what happened? Rockefeller phones, who was our president? Was it Mackenzie King then? Anyway, he phoned him and he said, let him go. Rockefeller said, let him go, so he left. And he went off to Russia, and he and Lenin, when they got there, Russia had an embryonic democracy, because Nicholas had already abdicated, and they had an embryonic democracy, parliament, Kerensky's government. They wanted to be a democracy and have a parliament. But no, so Trotsky and Lenin had to get over there right away, crush Kerensky, and they put him right out, and they started the big revolution, which ended with 60 million Russians dead. And of course, Rockefeller's bank was left alone. Rockefeller's bank over there in Moscow, nobody touched it. So anyway, then they had that enemy, the Bolshevik Revolution and all of that. And it's like, now then they had communism, which was the other side of the coin from monopoly capitalism. They're one and the same. And if you don't believe me, I mean, think of it this way. Marx, Mordecai Levy, by the way, not Marx, was supported by Engels, a huge capitalist factory owner in England. Engels supported Marx right through his life and his 9 kids while he wrote the book Against Capitalism. A capitalist supported him his whole life. They were like bookends. Engels and Mordecai were close, you know. But they were pals all their lives. And so the big factory owner capitalist, so they're two sides of the same coin. Monopoly capitalism and totalitarianism are the same. So what we're going into here will be corporate totalitarianism, which is the same as fascism. And Jefferson's definition of fascism was collusion between business and government. Well, that's what we have today. Just different degrees of it, but we have it. And that's what it is. Even Mussolini described it as that. Mussolini said, we might as well call fascism corporatism. That's what he said. So Jefferson and Mussolini agreed on that one thing. So what they want to happen, so when you have these, listen to these all-night talk shows and you hear Illuminati this and the Antichrist is coming and blah, blah, listen to all this. They will never talk about this because those are the people who pay them. So that we can tune in and think that, hey, we're getting the really inside dope here of what's really going on. Do you think, if that was true, that they'd be able to say this even on midnight talk shows? Get real. No. No. If you call in, as I have several times, I mean, I've been screened out, or Lenny Bloom will come on and say, oh, what are you going to talk about, Sydney? And I'll tell them, oh, no, you can't say that tonight. I mean, they do that to me all the time. But they prefer these things where they have some nutcase talking about the Antichrist at the bottom of her garden. Then they'll have somebody else coming on about it's really all the aliens, or it's people with scaly skin, you know, they're just disguised and they're doing all this. No, it's a simple money thing, all of it. It is so simple and so insane and so cruel that most people will not believe it. But so, the Bolshevik Revolution was funded. I mean, just get these books on your book list and read them. Funded by all these bankers. They couldn't wait. There was 50 million put in a Swedish bank, and Lenin had a private train that took him all the way across Europe and got him there, you know. So that's what happened there. Then they went into the, you know, communism and the terrorism. It's always the same MO all the time. If you really go back into history, you know the monetary history, you can practically tell what they're going to do next. And they figure everybody's forgotten now what happened, let's do it again, we'll do it again, you know, because they do not teach the history. It's all, we're in the belly of the beast here. Universities are owned by them. They fund them. So why are they going to teach an economics course that tells you the actual true monetary history? They aren't. Neither is the radio. No show. I had a show on CIUT for, what, a year and a half, Undercurrents. And it was an hour and a half Sunday, 4:30 to 6 or something. Well, I mean, after a year of handing out information like this, I was told, well, nobody needs your information. You know, you're gone. And then shortly after that, they locked out all the other programmers that had been there for a long time. So that's what happens. So there you have it. Anyway, oh, I'm going over. Sorry, folks. So the last, what myth am I on now? Okay. So that is what people will believe because they don't know anything. Now here's the actual article about Pakistan. I found it. December 24, 1999. Now listen to this. The court rules interest out in Pakistan. Pakistan's Supreme Court yesterday declared the charging of interest or riba on loans un-Islamic and ordered radical changes to the country's entire economy. Now, you remember what I said at the end of my essay that you read? Before even 9/11, I said, let's see what's going to happen in that area because of what they're doing. Now the Supreme Court ordered the government to set up an interest-free economy. Now our court could do that.
I asked.
Our court could demand that we go back to the original British North American Act, where our money was produced interest-free. Now, that's what they were going to do. Now, economy by 2001, and a verdict that has far-reaching financial implications. Now, this will kill you, this part. This is how you know, they've admitted. The verdict will likely spark an intense debate in a country where radical Islamic groups have been pressing hard for the abolition of interest. See, it's like the Kennedy assassination. It's like all the other assassinations. This is the most threatening thing, not the oil. They could buy the oil, they'll always get oil. They got their oil at decent prices. There was no need for a war about oil, okay? Now, it is hereby held that no amount, big or small, over the principal in a contract of loan or debt is riba and prohibited by Holy Quran, regardless of whether the loan is taken for the purpose of consumption or for some production activity, the Supreme Court's decision said. Now, then it says, local bankers and foreign creditors have in the past expressed fears that such a ruling, if enforced, could cause a collapse of the banking system.
Collapse in their system.
Yes, exactly. And loss, now get this, of foreign credit to indebted Pakistan. Loss of foreign credit to indebted Pakistan. If they had done that, if we had done that with our own bank, if any country in the world had set that example up, hey, it can be done, do you know what would have happened to all of this? Would have disappeared like the witch and the Wizard of Oz, just nothing, drifted to the floor because they had nothing. No, this, and what I said in the essay, that was Globe and Mail, December 24, 99, and I had written that essay before 9/11 happened, as you know by the date. I phoned my sister and I said, look at this. I said, now I'm telling you what is going to happen over there to prevent that Islamic country from being the first country to stop private issuance of money and no interest economy. Oh yes, these people were in an absolute hysteria. So they had to figure something. And it had to be just as well hidden as what happened to Kennedy, because back when Lincoln was shot, everyone knew why. Everyone knew what you know now, in the 30s and even the 40s. But after the Second World War, that was all taken out. It was never taught. Nothing to do with economics or money or the true history of monetary causes was ever taught again. And that is what's happened. And that's why it's going to be very difficult for us to get out of this situation. The first thing we have to do, when you take all this home, even if you want to set aside one book just for monetary things, please get involved. I mean, next Monday is our last class, and I will be giving you names of activist groups that you can go to or apply to, or if you want to get involved on that day. But between that and when we come back in April, I'm expecting, I just don't want you to come here and suck it all up like a sponge and just put it away somewhere. I know everybody's busy, but even if you just pick one group, even if you just have one program to call in once a week, just start getting this information back out so that the public is in the same position that's educated as they were in the 30s and 40s. Because after the Second World War, none of this was disclosed. It's very hard. Everything that comes out here, a lot of this is from my group, but everything that comes out here, you really have to do, I do the clipping thing, and it can drive you crazy. But when you find little things like this that are never printed again, then you know you can connect the dots. I mean, my sister's on the internet 24 hours a day. My son does all the research at the university, all the books. He can dig up books that haven't been in print for 50 years. There's always one around, flying around here somewhere, and we can do those for the class. But I'm saying only you people will be the ones to forward this on. this information. And I feel that by the end of this term, and possibly for new people, the end of the April term, you will know enough to debate, because you can phone in and debate people on radio, and they are so ignorant of this subject that they will let you talk. They have no response. They know nothing.
Sydney, do you have to lie about what you're going to say?
Oh,
If-
that's up to you. If it's some show where you think they might
But if
screen
you say
out.
what you're really going to discuss.
Well, just make it
they'll
vague.
screen
Just
you.
say, I just would like to talk about poverty in the country. Then get on and tell them why.
Okay.
Just make it vague. You don't have to lie. That's what they do. Look, government spending. Call in one night and say, I want to talk about government spending. And then
That's
give
a
them
good
the
thing.
amounts of interest that's really government spending, that's taking away all our assets. Just do what they do back at them. Kung Fu, okay? Kung Fu means inner truth. But you use their own facts. Use them and phone in and say, well, you said this and you did that. And use their own phrases, government spending, and then, and tell them. You can explain all these. The international banks are behind all of that. And so whoever, you might want to clip your papers, you might want to find out about radio shows you're going to phone in, you know. And then this other thing. Now next week we'll be talking, I wanted to tell you this now. Next week we'll be talking about soft and hard mind control. Now that means everything from prescription drugs right on up. Soft mind control is through drugs. Hard mind control is very physical. You get beat up, punched out, you know, if you're in a protest or whatever. And this thing now, that we are selling Americans back their own U.S.-made drugs cheaper, a lot cheaper than the Americans. The companies in America are selling them to Americans. We're selling their own. We're not making them here. We are just selling those American drugs back to them at a cheaper price. So this will be the next trade war. This will have to do with all of that, you see. They don't want people cooperating. These people, and this is my final statement, do not want independent, secure, civilized countries cooperating with each other. They want countries fighting each other and using lots of their money up in legal bills and exporting stuff that they need to support interests. This is what they want. They're driving every faction further and further apart. But when you get, and that's why you can't learn monetary history, once you understand monetary history, you understand what the goal really is. You know who really, it's the old world is the new world. The new world order is the old world order. Same, same, same. So all these people on these talk shows, people like Gary Bell, and you know, they haven't got a clue, or if they have a clue, they're told they better not have a clue, you know. So they're telling you all this other nonsense. Oh, you know, it's just so ludicrous. But the more you can phone into people like that and say, well, this happened, this is why we're poor, this is why we don't have any assets, we don't have any money, we're fighting each other for scraps. It's like a banquet going on, and they're up there at the banquet table, and everybody else is fighting over the scraps that are falling off the table. Like the trade agreements. Oh, we want to be, here's Maud, we want to be at the table. We just want to be at the table. I said, Maud, how can you be at the table if you're the one on the table? Okay? And you know what? You don't even get kissed. That's what it's about. So, you know, Maud needs to listen up. But of course, she's going to make a lot more money than I ever will. Because she's telling people what they want to hear. Yeah. Now we'll have questions. Are you through, George?
Sydney, your very best. I have to tell you about my name first, because that's the most important thing about you
Okay.
being a human being.
Okay.
And that's how they control you. So your name is everything. So your personal property is your name. And because you have a name, you are the creditor. Okay, in their eyes. They collateralize your name. The government collateralizes you, your physical person, by the use of your name fraudulently. So this is my name that the government gave me, or actually my mom and dad gave me.
I don't know anything about this, so you'll just have to...
Yeah, you'll see where I'm going when I explain this. It's W-L-O-K-A. Now that's, grade school grammar tells you that you spell your name capital T, lowercase h, O-M-A-S. Now, when you get anything from the government, usually it's like this. A or Thomas A or whatever I'm known by the government by. So this is me as a, what's called a natural, and this is a distinction made in law. Natural person versus the artificial person. Now, when you say this to any judge in court, he'll just squirm. Because he does not want you knowing the secret. And this is the secret, folks. Getting out of the system. Okay? Now, there's a battle involved. Frank's known me for a long time, and there's some other people in this group here that have known me for a long time. So there is a battle going on, and the war is against us. Okay? And you saw that by Sydney, that this global octopus, I call it a parasite, is gotten so large and so out of control that we now, obviously you've heard Sydney talk, that we now really have a huge problem on our hands. It's not just Canada, and it's not just the third world as they call it. It's everything, it's everybody, and it's enslaved everyone. Okay, so that's a fact. So you have to notice that distinction, once made in court, they have to address that question, and they skirt around it as much as they can. So I'm going to get to topic. So it's really quite involved, and I don't have a lot of time here, so I'm going to try and get to the point. So think of it this way. This name here, they got roughly $800,000 at your birth. That's what you're worth. And roughly when you're 70 years old, it's approximately, I don't know, 210 and change. So at 70. That's a fact. The government gets to collateralize your name for this amount of money. Because these guys up here trade that name. See, when you move to another country, they have to have somehow to balance the books, right? Now, all this is done behind closed scenes, again, behind closed doors. We don't really know where the name goes, but the name is issued, you are birthed. Again, it's all there in plain sight. You have to read differently. You have to think of the name, you have to think of the word a little differently.
Question, is that the reason why they have a birth certificate? Like,
That's
I was
correct.
always confused.
And that's correct. Now, I'm going to get
And
to that.
I was wondering why you need to be certified that you're born. Like,
Right,
is it
that is
obvious?
really a receipt. The birth certificate is a receipt, and it actually has a red number on the back of it, which is your receipt number, which is held in the Thunder Bay Port Authority. Now, why there? Port Authority. Now, I can, go into all kinds of tangents off this thing, but just we've done our research. That's a fact. Again,
Thunder or Thunder Bay?
Thunder Bay. Thunder Bay. Sorry. Port Authority. So that's where your birth certificate actually rests. That's where you're at birth, at port. Because Canada's really, well, my interpretation of it is that since 1867 we've been bankrupt. Actually, since conception we have been bankrupt. And as you know, 1815 the Bank of England was installed. So through those various mechanisms and through Shawinigan's shenanigans, they have basically usurped us, and right from the start. Now that's debatable again and again. You've heard Sydney talk about what they do behind the scenes and how they do things. We're not all privy to that information, obviously, for obvious reasons. Why do they do things in secrecy? Well, to manipulate us again. And so what I'm getting at is basically turning the tables on them, and that's what I'm doing. I have filed a lien against myself through the Personal Property Security Act. PPSA. It has to do with the Universal Commercial Code, the UCC.
Uniform.
Yes,
Can
Universal.
you write that out, because it's just letters,
Okay, the personal, sorry, thank you.
You can do personal property searches.
Personal
That's what that
property.
is. But I don't know I don't know anything about this, so I just know that if they're saying we were bankrupt, no, we're not bankrupt, we're
Right.
never bankrupt.
I'm-
So that's, you're using
I
your
should-
terminology.
Right, I should get to the point here. This is the debtor.
Mhm.
Okay.
That's
This is-
part of the system, and they're telling you you're the debtor.
This is the creditor. Again, remember, they want to tell you that you're the debtor, right? Exactly. So the way to get you into the court, they have to use this name, and then you attach to it to be your creditor to fund this guy to debtor. Okay, you get that? Understand that?
So how do you use that?
When they call your name,
to
again, when
get-
they call your name in court, let's say it's Mike, they're going to say Tom Loca, okay, when they come in court. I'm going to ask them, well, is that the natural person or the official person you're asking for? Okay, when I say that to the judge, he just cringes, but anyway. I am the creditor, Thomas Anthony Loca, which is me, the physical flesh and blood person. You have to understand this now. Only I can create, only the flesh and blood person, me, can create. Everything rests in the creation, okay? A corporation, which really is just a piece of paper, never created anything ever and never will. Not only that, it's bankrupt, because we've been bankrupt since 1867. So that means really, technically, all corporations in Canada are bankrupt, because they have no money, and I'll get to that in a minute. Okay, so understand that this is me, the creditor, that funds this guy, the corporate debtor created at my birth.
So this $800,000 and $210,000, is that a credit or a debt?
That's a credit that they get. Within there, that's, we believe it goes right to the IMF, World Bank, or the International Bank of Center.
Well, so that's like what they're taking as collateral, just like we have.
Correct. Remember I said when you move, they have to somehow balance their books internationally, and that's all done through the banksters.
All right. So now we're back to
Okay,
Personal
so Personal Property Security Act
What's
and
UCC?
the Universal Commercial Code. All commerce today.
Commerce Uniform Commercial Code.
Thank you. Universal, okay.
Uniform.
Yeah.
It
All
is
commerce
universal,
today.
yeah.
All commerce today falls under this Universal Commercial Code. Okay. Now, I've read a bit of this. I haven't read much of this, but I understand what's going on here. So I filed a $95 billion lien in this guy's name against this guy. Okay, so now anybody that wants to attach to me from this group has to go through that lane first, and I'm just using their system.
Is that your meaning if you owe money? This works if you owe money
No.
to them, or what?
I don't owe anybody anything. I
So
cleared my
what
debts
would
out in
you use this
1999. I cleared. You can. Well, basically, if you want to get into a court battle again, because you gotta secure what you do have.
Right.
But with what I'm doing, I'm not. I'm getting attacked left and right, so I don't have a lot. They're coming at me in all directions. So I'm defending myself constantly.
Right, okay, so
Because
they are
I've done this,
suing
right?
you for your assets, are they suing you?
Well, we'll see. I'm not being sued yet, because the first thing a lawyer will do, well, what does this guy own? That's what a lawyer will do. What does this guy own? Okay, that's the first thing he'll do is he'll search that. So if he sees this $95 billion lien that's filed here, now first of all, a lot of times he won't even understand what I've done. Okay, because they're not taught this. Of course not. They don't want anything to know this. Okay? So that $95 billion, they have to get in line, because that's my first lien against this. Now, who's going to argue that I don't own my name? And if they do go there, they just can't do it. Okay? So what I...
Just repeat that again. So who is who's instigating this $95 billion?
I am the creditor.
The creditor against the debtor.
Against the debtor, which is Thomas A.
So then
Loca.
the debtor should be paying the creditor.
It's actually the corporation. And
Okay.
we put it in the business section as well. Business category. And that really screws them up. Because then they don't know how to address it. I say to them, well, that's my registered business. See, because it's registered in my name, right? So they don't know how to kind of, anyway.
You don't know
That's
the
not-
outcome of what you're doing
No, that's
yet,
correct.
do you?
No, it has been tried, and I'm going to get to that now about how to abolish the debt. Okay, so what has been done was, basically, you heard Sydney speak that the banks create money by your signature on a piece of paper. So basically what they do is they make an exchange, they don't make a loan. And we basically hold them to that now. So when you sign that loan document that they call a loan, that's when that money comes into existence. So the promissory note that you created is the actual money. And I'm going to read from the Bank of Canada versus Montreal, Supreme Court decision. SCR 1148, you guys can look it up, which says, and it was Judge Laskin, I believe, yes, C.J. Laskin. This is very key to understanding what they're doing. What is said to be an unconditional promise to pay a sum certain in money is itself money. Do you understand that now? So remember I told you when you sign that loan document, that's when the money comes into existence? They're telling you right here that that is the money. So that's what these guys do. They collateralize your name, so that's really money, right? They also take promissory notes from this guy, which is again money. All along, assuming that you're this guy, but you're not, you're this guy. Now, the only way a court can deal with you is through this guy. They can't deal with you through this guy. Okay? Because all they can deal with are the artificial corporate people.
So can we ask you to let us know the outcome of this
Absolutely.
when it
Now,
happens, so that
Here's what I've done.
we'll know if it worked?
It
Yeah?
could take 50 years up there.
No, I don't think so.
Good.
Because we're kind of pressing the issue, so I don't think that'll take that long. So really, what I'm not assuming anything here. I've been taught by a very learned man, and through myself learning a lot of things, that and through Sydney's help and many other people in my life, that basically, like I said, the promissory note is the money. So when you get a bill, this is my MasterCard bill that they sent me, you have to return the original. Because this is really a note. It comes down to the bill of exchange. Okay, you have to know the bill of exchange. And it really has no value unless you give it value. Would this bill exist if your name was not on the document? No. So who gives this document value? You do. Okay, that's not an assumption, that's a fact. You can't refute that. So I sent it back to them, accepted for value, returned with a bond, which is the money, which is the promise to pay, for full discharge. And the account to remain open, and I said creditor, because I am the creditor, and they know that through the PPSA. Now, I'm not going to tell them to go search the PPSA, because I'm not going to give them anything. Okay, I don't want to give them any ammo. So they can do their own searches. And if they don't agree with me, well, okay. I'll have to ask them a certain number of questions. Page 1, page 2, that has 19 questions on it. 22 questions. And these are all based on law. Signed, and what copyrighted signature, non-assumption without prejudice, all rights reserved. So I reserve all rights to my signature. There's nothing assumed in this contract. And it's without prejudice, meaning I don't have any other intentions other than what's mentioned here. And I use my thumbprint, which is my sovereign creditor, only thing that really has value. If I didn't have this name here, and my thumbprint could still sign for me. So you don't really need a name here. I won't get into that. So I send them off this. I also declare that I have not participated in commercial activity because I haven't. Only the artificial person can, and remember, that's just a piece of paper.